Let's go say. Oh, yep, there it is. It's over here now. Hey, what's happening, wrestling fans? I'm I'm on my back porch instead of the studio.
It's the Two Bros Wrestling Show. Thank you for joining us. Even though we're a couple minutes late, some technical issues, so appreciate your patience on that. Doug, we do want to get into this tonight, though, because our main event is a fun one. We've been doing a lot of reviews and previews of premium live events. Today, we get to talk about really an evergreen topic that should be interest of wrestling fans, young and old. We're going to talk about the top 11 finishing holds of all time.
11.
I know people who watched the show last week are going, but Kevin, didn't you tell us 10? I did tell you 10, but no, we've got one more for you. And there's a reason for that, but you're going to have to stick around.
It's the bonus round, right?
It's the bonus round. Before we can get to any bonus rounds, we got to get the opening bell. We're going to open tonight with some financial news. I know we're not a financial show, but
the Two Bros Financial Show.
The Two Bros Financial Show, TKO released their Q2 financial statements, followed by their regular quarterly investment call on Thursday. Essentially, the numbers match with what our eyes have been telling us, and that is that WWE is doing good business. In fact, both WWE and UFC did so well in the second quarter that TKO has increased their targeted revenue for the entire year as a result of it. The new revenue target is $2.745 billion, up from the originally forecasted $2.67 billion. Overall, WWE revenue for the quarter was a robust $456.8 million. That's an increase of $46.5 million, basically driven by live event revenue. Again, what our eyes have been telling us, those buildings have been sold out. Media rights, content revenue, all up, but that live event revenue was significant. A lot of details obviously shared in a call like this. We are not going to go over all of them. We are not actually the Two Bros Financial Show. But one thing I will call out is TKO President Mark Shapiro insinuating that because there hasn't been any pushback yet on the higher ticket pricing that they have been implementing, they nicely said, I think the word used was they may have further optimizing, which is a nice way of saying is, hey, if they're going to pay it, we're going to keep raising these ticket prices. If you can get it, you can get it, I guess. And so that's probably what's going to happen. They also see site fees as something that is a revenue stream that they previously had not tapped into, that they're going to do a lot more of. We saw that recently with cities bidding against one another, where Las Vegas came in and swooped up WrestleMania from Minneapolis. They also used the word, which I thought was interesting. They called it more festivalizing opportunities. In other words, let's bring them in and do multi-day events, not just multiple wrestling shows, not just your SmackDown and your pay-per-view and your NXT pay-per-view, but just as I witnessed in SummerSlam weekend last weekend in Cleveland, you had the one dead man show from The Undertaker. You had Sami Zayn's comedy show. You could go see the Damian Priest documentary on the big screen. So they had a lot going on around town. Obviously, when you got a lot of wrestling fans in town, you're going to get money out of that. So they're going to be doing a lot more of that in the future. Cool. Some behind-the-scenes news from WWE, and I bring it up only because even though this is a name most of us aren't familiar with, it does portend that despite the rosy financial outlook, that they still are looking at ways that they can make changes when they think that it might benefit the organization as a whole. The WWE Vice President of Talent Relation Operation, Kristen Altman, was released by the company. She started as a receptionist with WWE back in 2007. By 2008, she was promoted to Talent Relations Coordinator and then ultimately climbed to the VP role in 2022. I know that's quite a career leap, but when you think about how she joined and how long she'd been around, especially in talent relations, if you think about how volatile that area has been through the years, No word, though, on who is going to be the replacement. For all we know, with the synergy that they kept talking about on the financial call and all the money they saved, could very well be someone that's doing this job for UFC and WWE.
Yeah, yeah, that's highly likely in a situation like this when they continue their synergy.
That is part of what drove those quarterly revenues up, is the fact that they save so much money by not having duplicates of positions. AEW. Let's switch to AEW for a moment. Well, I guess it's not a total switch because we're talking WWE as well, as in two more people that AEW is about to lose to WWE. I know they're about to say goodbye to two of their best performers and certainly one of their best all-time tag teams. The Lucha Bros are expected to be in WWE land very soon. In fact, it's such a certainty of over their departure that once their contracts are up, that they're going to WWE. That there was originally a match slated for them at All In that has been scrapped. It was supposed to be they were teaming with their fellow Death Triangle member Pac. They were going to be taking on the Patriarchy. As you saw on last night's Collision, there was a match to see who gets that role now, because they're that certain that the Penta and Ray Phoenix are off to WWE as soon as they're legally able to do so. I know. Kind of feel sorry for Tony, but you got to admit, it's a little exciting to think that the Lucha Bros are going to be in WWE.
It really is. Yeah, it really is.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a good time for wrestling fans and really for wrestlers right now. So
we knew it was a good time for Braun Breaker with his recent victory last weekend over Sami Zayn. Last weekend, when we talked about SummerSlam, Doug, we noted that that match was maybe surprisingly on the short side. Now we have evidence that proves it was supposed to be a lot longer, but was cut for time. Fightful Select got their hands on the match times before SummerSlam show, so we know how long everything was supposed to go. And on that run sheet, Zayn and Breaker were supposed to have a 12-minute match. They ended up being 6 minutes and 50 seconds or something like that. So it was about half of what they were originally slated to do.
I think it worked out in the long run. I think it works out in favor of the WWE because they put over their new monster, champion, and
they put him over hard.
Yes, they did in those 6 minutes. So it worked out, I think.
I have some clarification on something we talked about last week, and that's WWE's announcer plans. New play-by-play announcer, Joe Tessitore, will begin in September on the Raw brand. And during that time, Michael Cole is going to be moving over to SmackDown. That's what we reported last week. And a lot of outlets were saying it must have been a switch in plans. It's actually not a switch in plans. It is a temporary thing. So, yes, Tessitore is going to get his feet wet on Raw while Cole goes to SmackDown. However, come January, when Raw moves to Netflix, Michael Cole is going to be the voice of the A show, and Tessitore will then switch over to SmackDown, which was the original plan to begin with.
Okay.
That Netflix era that begins is kind of a big deal. I mean, not kind of a big deal. In the history of the show, it's a really big deal. Cole has earned that spot to be the voice of that moment when it happens. So I'm kind of glad they're going that route. Speaking of Cole, after last week's news where I relayed the story about Michael Cole admitting Vince was inappropriate on the headset, we have a similar story this week from a former WWE announcer. Obviously, the power Vince held in the industry for decades really minimized the number of these stories we used to hear. People were just not willing to speak out because they knew it was burning a bridge. It didn't matter if you were going to ECW. It didn't matter where you were going. Vince could still get you or blackball you in this industry. But yes, Jonathan Coachman is the latest, telling the story about the time he realized that Vince didn't care about Coachman's family. That's not really a surprise, I know, but at first in this interview, Coach was really reluctant to say anything negative about his former boss. Instead, he said he had no real thoughts on Vince in 2024, but that at one point he was around him a lot. He learned a lot from him, all of which I'm sure is true. The reporter pressed and pressed, and then he related this story about how it was Christmas Eve one year, and Coach was at home in Kansas, and Vince called him to tell him he had to come to headquarters in Stanford to shoot something. He feared repercussions, so he went. He'd only said he ever told Vince no once, and he paid for it. So he didn't feel like he could tell Vince no. So he headed off on Christmas Eve, only to find the reason he was needed is that Vince himself had wanted to go to Florida to be with his family, and so Coach had to do whatever it is that Vince was otherwise have done. So that's when Coach realized that my family is not a priority to the organization, which this
Right.
is not really a surprising story uh, for Vince McMahon or any
Not
corporate
not at
organization,
all.
really.
Right. Yeah. No. That's yeah. Good to be the king, though. You just call somebody else in so you can do what you need to do.
Yeah, come up on Christmas Eve.
Right. Sure.
Um, NXT is kicking off its CW era on October 1st, and they will be doing so in Chicago. The show's second week is going to be at an arena in St. Louis. These are notable things for NXT, who they've been doing great shows, they've been doing great ratings, they've been doing that pretty much all from the tiny performance center, and now they're going to be moving, at least for the first few weeks of the CW era, to larger arenas. It's an indication that the NXT business is doing well, and it's also perhaps an indication that this is going to be a regular thing back to
Okay.
actual touring, which is something that's been rumored for a while. They'll probably see how it goes to make sure those seats are filled. CM Punk's going to be there on night one in Chicago. Randy Orton, the St. Louis native, is going to be there in St. Louis, which, you know, I'm sure will help move a few tickets, but I'm all for it. I hope that they go back to touring. I think that really makes the brand an actual
Yeah.
third brand if you can go buy a ticket to see them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And NXT Live is such a great show. Such a great show.
And and recapturing a little bit of that spirit they had in the early days, which they have been the last year under Shawn Michaels,
Hmm.
moving to CW, it might be a really good time to capture that lightning in a bottle and see if you can get that into an arena again.
Yes.
We don't always cover ratings news, but we have something I'd like to get into tonight because today is the closing ceremony of the Olympics. Obviously, wrestling, as all programming has had to go up against the Olympics. That's tough competition usually. But
Or is
despite
it?
this, well, again, it's a tale of two companies, right? So
Hmm.
the Go Home SmackDown right before SummerSlam saw 2.1 million viewers, which was up from the prior week, despite being opposite the Olympics. On the other hand, that same night, later on, AEW Rampage only managed 209,000 viewers, by far the lowest watched episode in the history of the Rampage broadcast. So, two companies right now going two opposite directions. But hopefully, now that the Olympics are over, AEW can rebound a little bit more.
We'll see.
Doug, we end tonight's opening bell with some sad news and a tribute to a legend
Hmm.
of the industry. The one and only Kevin Sullivan passed away this week at the age of 74. Sullivan, he entered the wrestling business in the early 70s. It was 1972, though, when he found what he needed, and that was a mentor. He went to Florida, and he went under the learning tree of the legendary promoter Eddie Graham, who used him regularly on championship wrestling from Florida. Um, Sullivan would also spend time in WWF, Georgia Championship Wrestling, just all over the territories. I remember seeing him probably for the first time on TBS and Georgia
Hmm.
Championship Wrestling. And I'll be honest, at the time, I didn't think either good or bad of him. He was just kind of an undersized, solid worker who, you know, I'm like, okay,
But you
but
never
I'm a big
realized.
mark.
Yeah, you never really realized what he had going on, like behind the scenes, the booking, the just putting it all
Well,
together the way he did.
I tell you, he went back to Florida, and that's when he started putting it together. We didn't get Florida
Hmm.
wrestling. I know you didn't get either.
No.
But as a big mark, I was a diehard consumer of those after wrestling magazines. So
Uh huh.
suddenly, I'm starting to read about this Prince of Darkness character that is
Yeah.
striking fear in his opponents and fans. And he became a sensation over this gimmick that he had. And quite honestly, it was bordering on that. They never used the word Satanist because they probably were afraid of getting
Right.
kicked off the air, but they strongly insinuated it was the power of the devil that was giving him this cult like, you know, and I was fascinated. The Kevin Sullivan that I didn't really care one way or the other about when I saw him on TV, suddenly reading about him in the magazines, I couldn't wait to see the gimmick
Right.
and see the man. But you know what's funny is that it's such a different time when you think about it, because no, they didn't use the word Satanist. It was at a time. Hey, I grew up in church, like it was the devil's music, like anything devil related, like
Hmm.
that was as scary as it got. It probably wouldn't work as well today to insinuate that you were, you know, of the devil. But if you think about what he was really doing, it's not that far removed from what Bray Wyatt did 40 years later, right?
Hmm. Right.
Or what
Absolutely.
Malachi Black's doing now. It's, I mean,
Yes.
so Kevin Sullivan's ahead of his time, right? Um,
Trailblazer.
Part of that faction was his wife. He moved her into the
Hmm.
spotlight. Fallen Angel would start to go by the name of Woman. Doug, you mentioned that most of us probably got used to Kevin Sullivan during his 90s run. So he had
Yeah.
20 years in the business in the ring. But by the time the 90s come, he was in the ring, he was behind the scenes. That's when his mind really was at play. He was a booker. He had a lot to do with that run where WCW beat WWF for almost 2 years.
Yep.
Eric Bischoff takes a lot of credit for that.
That.
Um,
Yeah.
but Kevin Sullivan was the booker who was writing a lot of that stuff. And I guess most famously is might be, you know, Kevin saying that he booked his own divorce, which
Yes, he did, didn't he?
him he did. He had this
Whoops.
series of matches with Chris Benoit, and he put the services of his wife on the line in the storyline. There was like, you know, a storyline that she was having an affair with Benoit and all this stuff. Art uh, begins imitating, or life begins imitating art,
Hey,
and
man, they were living the gimmick. They were
they were
just
living
living
the
the
gimmick.
gimmick.
Little did any of us know how tragically it would turn out for Nancy
Yeah.
Benoit. But there's no doubt about it. When you look at the WCW days of the Three Faces of Fear, the Varsity Club, the Dungeon of Doom, he was
Dungeon of
always
Doom. Yeah.
the guy at the center of a faction, always a bad guy. I don't ever remember Kevin Sullivan getting
No.
cheers. Did you like him, Doug? I actually kind of like. There was something about Kevin Sullivan I liked at the time.
You know what? There was something I was always very neutral about Sullivan until like after the fact when I realized everything that he was responsible for and what he was doing behind the scenes, and I was like, oh, I get that now. But I mean, his spooky characters were great, but
Yeah,
it's one of those. It's one of those. I kind of acknowledge him like I don't know, like that good hand, that mid Carter. That's he is what he is. But then you realize the brain that he had for the business, and then it takes him to a whole other level. But when he was on air, not so much really.
and when you see the House of Black or the Wyatt
Uh huh.
family, and then you realize the legacy of Kevin Sullivan,
Yes.
you're like,
Yeah.
dude
That's
was
when it
ahead of
comes
his
back
time,
around.
man.
Absolutely.
And how many guys can go on a run of 20 some years and then transition to having a run during one of the peak eras behind the scenes for 10 more?
Hmm.
So definitely an influence on the business. The Two Bros Wrestling Show sends our condolences to the family, the fans, the friends of Kevin Sullivan.
Indeed.
And with that, Doug,
Well, I got my phone. Got my notes.
it's main event time, my
It
friend.
is.
We are here to talk about the finishing moves. In the video game, it's the hitting of the buttons in the right combination at just that right moment to get that cinematic sequence queued up that's likely going to end up in the downfall of your opponent.
Uh huh.
In the physical world, it's the drama heightening emotional trigger that we pull on the audience watching a wrestling match that is likely headed to its finish. We're talking about finishing moves for our main event topic tonight. Doug, it's probably worth starting out the conversation by noting something that Nigel McGuinness said last night. I thought it was a great lead into our topic because
Uh huh.
he asked Tony Schiavone, basically making fun of Tony for being old, what he missed most about the 80s. And Tony was, why he was sitting around thinking about it. Nigel goes, I miss being able to beat somebody with a vertical suplex.
right?
I haven't watched Collision yet because it's been a busy weekend here. But I love that because I was thinking about that and thinking about how many finishers are just so outrageous now. When like in the '80s, there were the DDT was a finish. Now it's just like
It's another move.
it's
But
another move. Yeah.
it's easy to forget because all of us grew up on televised cable wrestling for the most part,
Hmm.
and it's so ubiquitous the way the industry is now. It's hard to believe that for a majority of the history of pro wrestling, finishing maneuvers weren't really a thing. There was a common set of maneuvers that a lot of guys would use. Um, you would see matches end on suplexes, headlocks, sleeper
Yeah.
holds, like, and then
Yeah.
the
Right.
next week the guy would win. They didn't protect finishers. Nowadays, hey, Shawn
Oh,
Michaels does the super kick. You can't do a super kick because that's Shawn Michaels. You got to think you're only playing to the people in the audience or the people on the local TV. You're not worried about what they're doing in New York or Florida or any of the other
true.
places. Now you do a super kick and people, you do a chop, people are going to woo. Like, back then
Yeah.
no one protected moves. Everyone did a lot of the same moves. So
Yes.
finishers weren't, even when Doug and I first started watching, that's when finishers really started to become a thing. At the beginning there, when Doug and I were fans, they really weren't. I'd say mid
It,
80s, late 80s, 90s. That's when they really started to like, this is a
it
finishing
was.
hold.
I think it was very rare for a wrestler to have a finisher. I think there are some wrestlers that are just legendary for their finishers who've had them for quite a while. It just became synonymous with them. That's why we have 11 on our list.
That's right. We might have some in common. I will say that Doug and I did not confer on the majority of our list. But again, we got an 11 for you that you have to wait around for. We're going to, in no particular order, these are not in any particular order for me,
No,
Doug, but I am going to
no, same
start
with
with,
me.
if you're okay with it, I am going to
Yeah, go ahead.
start with the first one that I remember thinking of as a finishing maneuver that really blew my mind as a kid. And you actually just said it. It's the DDT. When I was a kid, I remember thinking that the pile driver was the most devastating move in all pro
Sure.
wrestling. A lot of guys did it. But if you recall, and again, this is the kayfabe era, right? For a while in the NWA, pile drivers were illegal. You weren't allowed to do it. So it was
Hmm.
something the heels would do when the referee was down, or you do it on the floor when
Yeah.
the referee was down. Dropping a guy on his head was legit dangerous, so dangerous that we had to ban the move altogether. In my mind as a kid, I'm like, pile drivers are even too dangerous to pretend to do, dropping a guy on his head. And then along comes this man with, named Jake the Snake. And he
Hmm.
gets around that pile driver rule by coming up with this fast, sudden, out of nowhere move that drops a guy on his head that isn't a pile driver. It's not illegal, but it still is going to concuss a man when he hits
Yes.
the floor.
Yes.
You said it yourself though. Everyone does a DDT now. At the time, I had never seen a DDT. It was revolutionary to me. I think for that reason alone. You remember the time when he about like killed Ricky Steamboat, like his head popped like a pineapple because he did the DDT on the floor,
On the floor. On the floor.
on
Yes.
the floor, and that
That's.
sickening thud.
Hmm. It's. I bring up the D. I brought up the DDT because it's not on my list, but it came so close to being on my list because Jake the Snake is who I always think of as the DDT, and
Yeah,
and I wanted to go back to that. I'm glad that it's on your list because we just don't think of it in today's day and age. It's like a middle of the match move. You DDT them.
yeah.
And then you're not pinning them. You're going on to do something else, or they just if you're Jacob Fatu, you just hop right back up from it. But
But if you hear DDT to this day, who do you think
yeah,
of?
Jake, absolutely.
So when we're talking about the
Abs-
best finishers of all time, what makes a good finisher? There's a lot of things that make a good finisher, but I would argue that one of the things that makes it a classic all-time finisher is if you are synonymous with the move, that is a all-time good finisher. It doesn't matter how many thousands of wrestlers do a DDT from here until the end of time, people will think of Jake the Snake Roberts.
Yes, they will. That's great. That's a great start. I love it.
Let's hear one from you, Doug.
So I also went with something that this wrestler terrified me as a child, and to this day I often name drop him from time to time. But and this is something I also think is like one of the first finishers that I was introduced to, and I was just doing a little bit of research for it, and it's kind of interesting how this evolved into him being synonymous with this, and even how he had to change the name because he did not come up with this move. It's not like he stole it. It was one of those. Well, I mean, wrestlers 70s, 80s. Everybody's doing everything, like you said, but Ox Baker and a lot of our fans, a lot of people may have no idea who Ox Baker is. But if we didn't have technical difficulties, I would do more than this. But that is Ox Baker, all right. That man is terrifying.
Google
And
an interview with him, hear him talk, and you'll be scared. Even as an
Ox
old man, if you heard him talk, you'll be
Yes.
scared.
So the Ox Baker Heart Punch, which later apparently had, and I don't remember this as a child. I've always known it as the Heart Punch, but he had to change it because Stan Stasiak was the originator of the Heart Punch apparently, and Ox had to change it to the Hurt Punch. But this devastating move where he hits the guy in the chest, and it causes all this cardiac damage. So, being the heel that he was, and them working shoot into kayfabe things, two wrestlers that he had worked with later died from cardiac issues. So they just worked that into the character to make it
Yes.
even that much more of a devastating move. Because this dude, Google him, he's terrifying, always a heel, but that just devastating heart punch scared me to death as a child.
Again, it's very simple. You could not probably get away with that today.
Right. Yeah.
But because it fit his character, and maybe when we're talking about like what makes a great finisher a great all-time finisher, yes, being synonymous with you is one thing, but that kind of backstory and character building and reputation. Ox Baker was a dangerous man who could, maybe kill you because his finishing maneuver actually affects the rhythms of your heart.
Yes, and had
terrifying.
killed two wrestlers. Legit, these wrestlers died of heart issues. They didn't. Neither one of them realized they had. Neither of them realized they had cardiac issues. One shortly after a match, and I'm not sure about the other one, but not relatively after wrestling Ox and receiving this devastating heart punch, that guy also died. So he just worked it into the character and wrote it.
I'm glad that you went and did the research because I had always wondered about that. I for some reason in my mind thought that someone actually had died in the ring
and
they worked that into the gimmick. And maybe I'm just misremembering. Maybe it was somebody did die of the heart punch.
Yeah, there were two wrestlers. Let's see. Infamy, two tragic incidents where wrestlers died after matches with Baker. Their deaths were actually caused by pre-existing heart conditions. However,
they worked it into the gimmick.
They worked it into both of these guys had pre-existing heart conditions. The promoters and Ox just worked it into his character, and he became this man who could legit kill you in the ring. If you didn't die in the ring, there was potential for you to die shortly thereafter because of this devastating heart punch, which later had to be renamed the Hurt Punch. But I do not ever remember it as the Hurt Punch.
I don't either. But I do like that for our first two, we both dug back into our childhood.
Yeah,
probably to the very beginning of when finishers started to become a thing, which, I don't even know that they called them finishers, probably signature maneuvers. Guys had like a repertoire. Mm-hmm. This next one, though, definitely falls in the line of a finisher. A finisher was a thing by the time this next move comes around. And I'm going to say it right now. I don't know if there is a more over finisher of all time than this next finisher. You can supercut a montage of memorable stunners. And why is the Stone Cold Stunner such a good move? It's simple. It's sudden. It allowed Stone Cold, if he wanted to play up the high drama, he didn't have to do it sudden. He could kick you in the stomach, and while you're bent over, sit there and, again, character building, right? I can sit there and flip the bird to you in your face and then finish the maneuver. And then there's the over the top, sometimes comically ridiculous, great selling potential that your opponent can do to make it look like $1,000,000.
Yes.
I'm obviously thinking of The Rock, who was one of the all-time greats at taking it. Sometimes that man would flip over 5 times or something after getting stunned.
Yes.
Obviously, the very memorable, many memorable stunners that Stone Cold hit on his boss, something that everyone had longed to do
Yes.
with Vince McMahon. You could really ham this one up for effect. There's not a lot new under the sun. You said it earlier, like, Ox didn't invent the heart punch. A cutter, a stunner, like there were variations of this move. But when you can tweak it and make it your own, that's exactly what Stone Cold did. To this day, when Kevin Owens does it, it's in tribute to Steve Austin. It's, to me, as iconic as the sound of that breaking glass.
Yes.
The image of the stunner
Absolutely.
is, this is over, is one of the coolest looking finishing maneuvers of all time, in my opinion.
It really is. It's such an over move. And, anytime you see it, it's not just a stunner. I don't care what wrestling promotion you're watching, what wrestler you're watching do it. In your mind, you're thinking Stone Cold Stunner. Even if the announcers or whatever you're watching don't just call it a stunner, it's like, that's a Stone Cold Stunner.
Man. He owns it, man. He owns it.
He does, and you're right. It is. It's one of those moves that there could be a massive montage of stunner after stunner after stunner after sale after sale after sale.
Stone Cold Stunner, one of the all-time great finishing maneuvers.
Absolutely. So I did a couple of much older ones, from digging into the childhood here. But I was thinking, about just these moves that today we really might not even think of these as incredibly devastating moves. Like the DDT, but I'm thinking, when you can just do this and this is calling for it right here. Exactly. And for it to not be just synonymous with one person, but an entire family, when you break out the iron claw. I mean, and of course the hand strength to feasibly crush someone's skull, but it didn't matter. This was a devastating move that the Von Erichs would bring out and bring a man to his knees to the ground, and it would be over. And not just one, but all the Von Erichs have a variation on this.
So with that move, I wonder, and this might be a little bit of Two Bros research, but Fritz obviously was a heel, and by the time we got used to seeing the Iron Claw, it was the family move. But the only other person I can think of that had a devastating claw that wasn't a Von Erich was Baron von Raschke. Remember Baron von Raschke with the claw?
Yes.
Now I'm sitting here and thinking to myself, was that a Nazi thing? Was that a move that all Germans supposedly did? And I don't want to do it here on air, but is that like the hold up there, like the hand up in the air, kind of Nazi salute kind of?
Oh, now I'm wondering that. Yeah. That's interesting.
But there's no doubt about it that, they would, as simple as it is, they would pretend like he has the hand strength that he could crush a pineapple.
Yes. I mean, it's this devastating move. I mean, even, again, Kevin Von Erich, old Kevin Von Erich, they're still taking somebody out, because he can do the claw and take somebody out.
It is kind of cool to see Ross and Marshall on AEW TV now doing those moves still.
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
The thing. A finisher is all about selling the devastation of the move and the fans' belief in it. It doesn't necessarily have to be convoluted or overly fancy. In fact, we see so much of those kind of moves and we pop for them, but they don't have the same lasting impact as, like you said, that does to strike fear, because we all bought into, he could crush this man's skull. I think some of the best finishers are simple finishers.
Oh, absolutely.
This next one, which is number, I guess we're up to what? This is
this be
four. Yeah.
Oh, wait. 2 for
4.
me, 2 for you. So 4. Yes, we've done 4.
Yep. So this is number 5. And this is not a simple finisher. So I know I started off by talking about how, you hit that right button combination in WWE video game, and suddenly you get that finisher off. I always like designing my wrestlers in those video games with something like a stunner or a DDT, something that quickly be administered that you can go for that pinfall. They look cool, but let's not forget a different kind of finisher is an aerial finisher.
Oh,
the
yes.
hard
Yes,
part
indeed.
is you have to get in a video game. It's the same problem that you have in the real life approximation that is the sport of professional wrestling. You have to get your opponent down in the right position, get all the way to the top rope, get up there and execute the move. So there's a whole lot more that can go wrong with
Yes.
these high risk moves, as they call it. So it doesn't have the same sudden effect of a stunner or a DDT. They require setup, obviously, to execute, but they can still be very memorable in their own right. So for an aerial finisher, I wanted to get something in there. I want to say honorable mention, sorry, Billy Kidman, when you did that shooting star press for the first time, thing of beauty, blew my mind. Jimmy Snuka might be the first guy I saw regularly go to the top rope, and it blew my mind. But if I talk about the all-time best from the top rope as far as just the simple splash goes, the 5-star frog splash. Did anyone ever do it with the same grace, height, beauty of Rob Van Dam?
No. I mean, Eddie has a great 5-star frog splash,
He
but
does.
Eddie just has the frog splash. But yeah, this is the first one that's on both of our lists. Yeah,
Is it really?
it is because it, like you said, it is. It is a thing of beauty. I mean, and to this day, he can still nail it.
And to this day,
really,
other guys use it. But who do you think of when you think if
yes,
someone says frog splash? He wasn't the first. It's still happening. The Usos use it, like the Fatus use it. But
yes,
man, it's Rob Van Dam. He perfected it.
Absolutely. I'm. I knew we'd have some cross pollination at some point because I tried to go not necessarily obscure, but just things that really made an impression on me throughout my wrestling viewership lifetime. And yeah, it's there.
Man,
Frog Splash.
when I first saw Rob Van Dam, you probably had the same. Like you're seeing ECW, which was so
Yes.
different than anything else we had access to at the time. It's now we all have access to everything. It's hard to put yourself back in that spot where what you're seeing was truly something that you had never seen before. But whether it was the weapons or the lack of rules or just the sheer like throw of the chair and then kick it in your face and then the rope to rope. I mean, like there was so much innovative about Rob Van Dam. He seemed like, a wizard that like
Yes.
a wrestling wizard. Like no one did that kind of high flying. And that's why if I had an example of a high flying finisher, it had to be Rob Van Dam.
Yes, absolutely. And Rob could get up there so quickly too.
That's true.
Just
because he could just leap up and he didn't climb. He leapt to the top.
Yeah, such an athletic guy all around anyway, but that's good.
That's fantastic.
So that's what it's funny because my list is in no particular order, but right after the Iron Claw is the 5-star frog splash.
Well, I initiated that one. Let's let you have a chance to steal one from me. See if we got another coming.
I don't know if I'll steal this one from you, but this would be my what is that? That would have been my third one. So this would be my fourth one. Is also a high flying maneuver because I think this is a move that is also synonymous with just one person. And he's my favorite brother of the team, even though he's had his share of problems. His star shines so much brighter, and I think it's burn out so much quicker than his brother. But I'm not sure where either one of them are going to land. Now I think they'd be great behind the scenes, but the Jeff Hardy Swanton from any height, I had to put it on this list as an aerial maneuver as well. Because it's just a thing of beauty. Because he not only is he up in the air, he gets such great height, but then he's flipping as he's coming down, and it just kind of rolls. I mean, everybody looks so protected when it is when it's done right. Everyone looks so protected, but it still looks so devastating because the mass of a human is coming down on this other human in a way that's not the frog splash, but it's something equally as devastating.
And it requires some acrobatics because you're going head over
Absolutely.
heels. And I
Yeah.
mean, it's the definition of high risk, particularly when a Jeff Hardy would do it, because sometimes he would decide to do it from a cage, from a jumbotron, from a ladder.
Right. Right. Let's get a 20-foot tall ladder, stick a Dudley on a table, and then, come off the ladder from the very top of the ladder.
There is no doubt about it that even though they obviously were taking their cue from like the Rock and Roll Express and things like
Yes.
that, the Hardy Boys were innovators that to this day people are doing moves that are in debt to the Hardys. Heck, I talked about Kevin Owens earlier taking the stunner. He's got a pretty good swanton too. And who is that?
Yes, he
I mean,
does. He does.
you think of one person though, regardless of who does the move, that is
Yeah.
a Jeff Hardy finisher. Good
Absolutely.
call. So for my next one, so I have to say, this wrestler would not be on my Mount Rushmore or anything like that. I like him. I respect him. However, his finisher would go on the Mount Rushmore for me. In fact, I could argue that this is the perfect finisher. Why is it the perfect finisher? It can be set up and teased for drama, like the stunner.
Yes.
It can be hit suddenly. It's an offensive move. It can be a defensive move. It can be hit from literally, you know where I'm going, don't you?
From out of nowhere, Kevin.
Man, I like Randy Orton. I respect Randy Orton. Again, Randy Orton is not even in my top 10 wrestlers of all time. But to this day, at his age, it does not matter. And a lot of it is the opponent and the selling, and they might be jumping off the rope or doing. There's so many ways you can get into the RKO, which again is a cutter. It's not that different than what, like, think in terms of what DDP does with with his finishing maneuver. But there's just Cody Rhodes. He has his
Cody cutter. Yeah.
Cutter is a very common move, been used for years, but the RKO is a singular variation of it that honestly may be the perfect finisher because of how many different ways you can get into that move, how quickly it can happen, and how even if it's been a Randy Orton match where you've had 20 minutes worth of headlocks, that crowd is going to come unglued as soon as that finisher comes out of nowhere with a giant sell by his opponent. It works every time. In a variety, I mean, it's hard to even have a bad RKO. It's a very simple maneuver to put on too, which I think sometimes the real complicated finishers, if you don't, apply it or get it the timing just right, it can look really bad. RKO 99% of the time looks perfect and devastating.
It's a simple maneuver until it's not, because I don't really think about it as a defensive maneuver. Was it WrestleMania? I don't remember which one, but where he's up against Rollins. Rollins is coming off of a maneuver. Randy's on the ground or on the mat. Randy comes up off the mat to meet Seth Rollins with the RKO.
Yeah.
Just a thing of beauty because it can totally be hit from literally from out of nowhere. Love
you
the
talk
setup.
About a montage.
Yes.
You could do a montage of the last 20 years of famous RKOs, variations on the exact same finishing maneuver.
You could Google that right now, and I'm pretty sure there's probably 10 or 15 different cuts and different edits of like 20, 30 minutes of that already out there.
Yep.
It is a great choice for that. And I have to agree with you. Randy is great at what he does. He's not going to be on my Mount Rushmore either. Well, his RKO didn't make it to my top 5, but
good, because I want us to have good.
But I've got one more left, and this is because this would be my 5th, because the frog splash for both of us. So we did pretty good about not cross pollinating. But
I got one more after this. So.
I know it may.
So you might have it.
Well, let me just say, this is without a doubt the most protected finisher in all of professional wrestling. without a doubt, there's only one person who does this. And you do not you do not kick out of this unless you're him. And that's Kenny Omega's One Wing Angel. I love the way it looks, and I love that it is so incredibly protected, all the way from New Japan into AEW to this day. You know, you don't nobody once you know the match is over when Kenny puts the person in that modified electric chair and brings them down. Unless they are able to get out while they're still on their shoulders, you know Kenny has won then because nobody kicks out of that one wing angel. And I just
Yeah.
think it looks cool. And I just think Kenny is one of the Kenny is a goat. You know, I hope he has a speedy and healthy recovery and gets back to us soon. But it's yeah, I had to put it on my list because it's just such a cool move. And it has such a cool name.
So here's my next to last one. I say next to last one because again,
Oh,
we had that bonus one that we're going
right.
to get to. But I did want to get as many examples as I could of different finishing types. I know I mentioned the sudden singular moves that
Mm-hmm.
we have. I mentioned the aerial moves that we have, but here's another finisher type we have not yet talked about. And I wanted to get at least one example on the list, and that's that of the tag team finish. Ever since
Oh,
the Rock and Roll
yes.
Express hit that double drop kick, the idea of two guys combining to finish,
Mm-hmm.
to get one maneuver became part of what it meant to be a really good tag team. That tag team finisher that is something that couldn't be accomplished with the two of you. Mentioned Jeff Hardy. That the Hardys are an all-time great tag team. Jeff Hardy though does that move even on his own. Doesn't require his
Mm-hmm.
brother to set it up.
Nope.
So
Nope.
I want to, with a nod to the Road Warriors, awesome Doomsday device, the best tag team maneuver of all time, in my opinion, one of the best finishers in general, the Dudley Boys with the 3D. It is the
Yeah,
perfect two-man
it is.
of the quick setup and then the devastating execution and the great sell jobs and the look of panic on the guy's face as they know that it's coming. I think as far as tag team maneuvers that require both men to set up and execute, it does not get any better. Every tag team wishes they had something that looked as cool as the 3D.
Yes. Yeah, that is definitely a one for the list. Absolutely.
So, Doug, I know we
Yes,
said we
sir.
had 11, but I guess because we had one in common, we're
Hmm.
going to end up with 10 after all.
Well, I do have an honorable mention because I've thought about like wrestling holds, because this one almost made my list. Because and again, I was diving deep into the childhood and thinking about just different wrestlers that really
You
terrified me.
pull another one forward. That way we'll give the folks 11 like we promised.
So it's not on my the camel clutch, because the Sheik always scared me too when I was a kid. And that move, it doesn't look, that devastating, but when you're a kid and you see somebody getting stretched like that, and Rusev, that's basically Rusev, what,
Yeah.
oh, gosh, what was his move? Well, I can't even think of what it's called now, but that's basically what Rusev is doing too with his stretch. But that camel clutch was just equally, not equally, but even more devastating, more terrifying because it was coming from the Sheik. This evil Iranian sheik was, had the good guy in it, and it's just so devastating. And the best good guys would never tap to it; they would always just pass out from the pain of it. And that's the way the sheik would win, which was even more scary to me because he would take somebody out. Not as scary as like cardiac damage, but
Hey, I'm glad that you brought that one up. You actually have given a very perfect segue into our number 11. And the reason being is that I saved not only what I think is the best for last, but one thing we hadn't mentioned until you just did is what is actually my favorite type of finisher. We have the sudden ones that lead to the pin. We have the
right.
aerial ones that look like a work of art, complicated things of beauty. You have the tag team that takes two guys, but you're the first to actually mention the submission finisher, which was always my favorite because the idea of like instead of just getting a guy's shoulders pinned for 3, you actually get him to say, I'm sorry, I quit, no
Hmm.
more, stop,
Right.
you're
I'm
hurting
done.
me,
Yeah.
or yeah, knock him out. Like the idea of a submission, I always design my video game wrestlers with a cool submission
Yep.
finisher. And there's so many good ones of all time, right? You mentioned it, and I had it here on my list when I was setting this up. Camel clutch, the crippler crossface, the
Yes.
sharpshooter, the Taz
Yes.
mission. The great thing
Hmm.
about these moves is they tease out the is it? Will he give up? Can he make the ropes? Like there's something that is there in the
Hmm.
drama of a submission that isn't in any of these other moves when it's just will he or won't he kick out. Um,
Right.
but of all the submission finishers of all time, Doug, there's one that we both agreed rises above. And this is where we have
Absolutely.
our bonus. And that's because Doug and I don't ever talk about what we're going to say on the show in advance. However, when I broached to Doug the idea of the concept of the top 10 finishing maneuvers of all time, he instantly goes to figure four, which of course is exactly what I was thinking too. When we both had that first off our lips as all-time top finishers, and we both are thinking Ric Flair, instantly we said figure four out loud as one. It is heightened drama, and the thing that makes it such a great finishing maneuver is it's associated with the all-time greatest.
Right.
And even though it defied physics that I never quite understood, it very often wasn't the finish. It was very often, if I just turn over on my back, it reverses the pressure. So
Yes.
then there was the figure four reversal. Again, defies the laws of physics, makes no sense. It's easy to forget that what made Ric Flair great is that he'd wrestle 60-minute matches, 55 of which he would get his butt kicked. It wasn't like he had a
Absolutely.
lot of offense. And the funny thing, especially if you watch a lot of old wrestling, and I know that Doug and I do, I imagine a lot of you dig into the archives even before your own respective times as well. You will see, even during Ric Flair's era, his opponents, Dusty Rhodes had a figure four, Jack Briscoe had a figure four, Barry Windham used a figure four. Like a lot of
Hmm.
guys from that era used the figure four. No one, though, now can do a figure four that you're not going to hear. Woo!
Woo. Yep.
That's because it is a signature that 1,000 men have done, but only one man owns. And that is what makes it the perfect submission finisher. Because again, the drama.
Absolutely.
You got Ricky flailing around, Flair throwing his head back with that
Hmm.
bleach blonde hair covered in blood. I mean, it is the epitome of looking back at the 80s and thinking about what high drama, high stakes, and professional wrestling looks like. That's the image you get in your head.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's just such a like you nailed it. It is such a dramatic move because and it can be led up to for so very long by just
Yes.
working the ring psychology of working the opponent's leg, and you'd see Flair do that, and you see wrestlers today working the opponent. Once somebody he recognizes the leg injury, oh he's going after. Oh, there he is. He's got the figure four.
And that's where I give it the nod as the greatest of all time because unlike a stunner or a DDT or some of those others we've talked about that are amazing, and there's some of the all-time greats.
Yes.
You can hit those out of nowhere and finish a match. But you talk about playing into the story of a match. A figure four is that psychology of the entire match, working a
Hmm.
body part and doing what you're supposed to do in the kayfabe world of wrestling, and that's wear a person's body part down so that that
Yes.
move is always hanging out there as it's coming. It makes it the perfect all-time finisher in the world of
Absolutely.
professional wrestling.
Absolutely.
And that, folks, is the best finishers of all time. Do
Indeed
you
they are.
agree? Disagree? Is there any we left out? I know there's a ton of
Oh, I'm
fantastic
sure.
finishers that we
Yeah.
left out, but we want to hear what you think of our list and put in the
Absolutely.
comments some of your absolute favorites that you think of when you think of all-time great finishers. But with that, Doug, we're going to hit our own finish
Let's
here.
do it. Big finish. Take us
That
home.
is the big finish. Doug, let's start with botch of the week.
Man, here's the thing. Tony Khan, I think, can put on great pay-per-views. uh, And he has some really great ideas, I think, as a wrestling. Because I mean, again, if our father either one of our fathers was a billionaire, and we would have a wrestling company too. We would probably make a lot of the same mistakes that Tony does because we are such marks just like Tony. But sometimes you don't need to open your Wednesday night show with a match again that is a pay-per-view quality match. It didn't go an hour this week, but you don't need that. And then you don't need to have not one. One is okay, but one pull apart brawl is cool. You don't need multiple pull apart brawls in the same show, a 5 star match to open things with, and then just kind of keep building and building and building. It's not a pay per view. God knows Tony can't do a pay per view in 2 hours. Why is he trying to cram one into Wednesday night like this? So I
Yeah.
I don't want to call all of like Dynamite a botch because I don't think it is. There's great stuff there, but slow down. I'm watching TV thinking these guys need to slow down. I've heard Al Snow talk about this before that people are going to get hurt and get seriously hurt in AEW, which I think they have before, and they're going balls to the wall on a Wednesday night when 200,000 people are watching. You know,
Yeah,
slow
exactly.
down,
Those Rampage
guys.
episodes that no one's watching doesn't need to have pay-per-view quality. I'm with you.
You're right. Yeah. I mean, just all the product Rampage, Collision, Dynamite, slow it down. Stop it.
Yeah,
You
you
guys are good
know,
at what you do. We get it.
mine. I'm actually going outside of AEW. I feel like I have hit them hard the last few weeks. WWE is really hitting on all cylinders right now. We
Oh,
mentioned it at the
absolutely.
top of the show, financially as well. But I did have a call out this week. I know we've in the past I've talked about wrestling math, where if you're in a 3-man, you have a 33.3% chance of winning. No, you don't. But just the same way that wrestling math can be a problem, so can wrestling geography. I know Bash in Berlin. It's taking
I know
place in
where you're
Germany. You know where I'm going with this. I also know that Gunther
going.
has a very long, extensive ties to Germany due to his years of working in the the WXW promotion there in Germany. But
I thought
however,
about this too.
unlike Randy Orton, I also know that Germany is not Austria, which is the country.
Right.
Yeah, that is the country that Gunther is actually from.
Yes,
Austria.
Berlin is not in Austria. Germany
It's
is
the
not
same.
Gunther's home country, but it's all the same to
No,
Randy.
it's the same continent. It'll be interesting to see if they keep trying to promote it as a home show for Gunther, which I think they kind of. I mean, I get it. It's like how you and I are separated by a river here. Like Austria is
Right.
right there, but it's okay. It's the region, but it's not
Yeah.
the country he's from.
Right.
That's my botch.
It's a good one. It's a good one. Nobody had
Performance.
potential to get hurt with that though.
That's true. Mine's much less serious. We can recover from a geography lesson.
Man, so for performer of the week, I don't. I, this man, he's winning it again this week because he's just on a winning streak. Has not said a word since he came back. Doesn't need to say a word. But again, the pop when Roman came out on Friday night and took care of business again.
Yeah.
And now, I think like the Tongans, as they get referred to now, are just like they're cannon fodder. That's all they
Oh yeah.
are.
Yeah.
They are nothing but cannon fodder. I mean, give Tama Tonga a little bit of something. I mean, Tonga Loa is he's had problems since he crawled out from underneath the ring and debuted. But I mean, they're just cannon fodder. They take Jacob off, which I'm still not quite sure if he's hurt or not.
Yeah.
This is
There's
the
the
shooty.
yeah.
Yeah, this whole shooty kayfabe. I don't know what's going on. It makes perfect sense to keep them separated because
Yeah.
you don't want the werewolf and the over-the-counter
Punch
tribal
out.
chief. Not yet. You don't want that. But Roman Reigns, man, having his second best week since he returned.
Man, I could totally do it. Like last week, you and I both had Roman as our performer of the week. I could very well make that argument again this week. You're right. He was great without saying a word. I
Not a
instead am
word.
going to the other thing that WWE did well that they held off of SummerSlam to make a big deal about on Monday Night Raw, and that is the actual in-ring debut of the Wyatt Six.
Mm-hmm.
You, when you have this gimmick, there's always that fear is like, okay, this is really cool, but then the
But
bell
yeah.
rings and now we have to
Mm-hmm.
have a match. And how will these puppets coming to life? Like, there's a lot of ways that this could have gone wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
there, you talk about a perfect execution there, from the looks, from the entrance to the the acknowledgement of Bray Wyatt, from the lantern to the rocking chair. It's not a straight up rip. It's a continuation. It's a homage. It has a bit of the character work that he did, but it isn't like ooh spooky metaphysical. Like these are people in the real
Mm-hmm.
world playing mind games with you.
Right.
It worked for me. And some of the folks they have
Yes.
in this are folks that weren't necessarily going to be working on their own with their own gimmicks, and they have managed
Mm-hmm.
to package up everyone into this one entity that, as far as the debut goes, we'll see how it goes from here long term. How do they sell? How do they do big programs?
Mm-hmm.
We have plenty of times to figure that out. But as for a debut with the cackling Uncle Howdy at
Excellent.
ringside, excellent. Just absolutely chef's
Mm-hmm.
kiss, right down to the name of the Wyatt
Yes.
Six, spelled with a
You
six.
know,
I mean,
it's,
everything about it is absolutely perfect. And I want to call them out for my performance of the week.
I love it. I do not disagree with it. That's great.
Doug, we're going to end on match of the week. And there was a lot of good ones this week to choose from.
There were a lot of good ones, and I probably showed my hand at the beginning of my rant about AEW. But Kyle Fletcher, MJF, opening
Yeah.
up Dynamite. Man, Kyle Fletcher, he is like a little Will Ospreay, and I mean that in the best way I can. I'm not taking anything away from him, but this kid is going to be top tier. This kid is already top tier, man, and everything he did, and MJF just continues to show what what a generational talent he is. He can talk. He can talk the talk, but he can also walk the walk when he needs to. And you put him in the ring with stuff like people like Osprey, people like Kyle Fletcher, anybody you put him in the ring with, and he rises to the occasion. And and just everything about that match, even almost like the bloodline type stuff, where there's even more going on after the match, the nuances of somebody blocking Will Ospreay back in his locker room, although it was odd to have a camera in there that just decided to turn on as Will's trying to get out. To Don Callis going, where were you, just to the blood on the shirt and everything, and it was just great. And the
Hey,
match itself, excellent quality.
it's wild to think there was a time that the knock on MJF was that, well, he can talk, but he doesn't have
Yeah,
any signature matches. Well, that resume is pretty built at this point. People
yes it is.
people cannot be underestimating the fact that it's not always an opponent that's carrying this man. He's doing more than his fair share in the ring.
Hmm.
Great match, excellent match. My match of the week that I'm going with this week is low key, I think, the best tag team out there, and you don't hear them talk about enough, and that is your NXT tag team champions,
Mm.
Axiom and Nathan Frazier. This week they had a heck of a match against MSK, which included a great heel turn at the end of Wes Lee turning heel on MSK. So I guess he really turned heel on the Rascals now. So
Hmm.
since there is no more MSK without him,
Right.
Wesley is a heel, lots of possibilities, but these four guys can all go high flyers, nonstop action. And definitely worth a rewind. If you didn't catch NXT this week, check out this match. Not just was it a great in-ring contest, it had a great post-match angle that's going to lead into the fall season of NXT television. See where a heel Wesley goes, and if the Rascals stick around, or if they go, or if he gets them banished all the way back to TNA. I don't know. We'll see.
Banished all the way back to TNA. I like that.
They're still under contract. They might actually,
Yeah.
this might be a way to rot them back onto their own show,
Yep.
and Wesley to bounce off of that into a heel role here on
Hmm.
NXT programming. But we will see. And just like that, Doug, we will
Just like
see the
that.
folks next week because we have 2 weeks of all in programming for you, a preview of the biggest show of the year for AEW that is coming next week, and then we'll also be doing a review, and then we'll have a bit of a end of summer break, so you'll want to make sure you catch these next 2 weeks of programming. We appreciate you tuning in regardless of how you watch or when you watch. Thank you. Like, subscribe, comment. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to see you back here next week when we're live on Facebook at 8 p.m. Eastern time next Sunday.
Good night, everybody. Go watch some wrestling.